Ho, ho, ho! Merry Christmas! I'm Eric Pappenfuss. It's Friday, it must be a buy day, and welcome to a very special Christmas Eve edition of Buy Day Friday. Now, as we tape this, it's looking like a white Christmas. There's snow on the ground outside. We're over here at the collectible room. And in honor of the holiday season, our box today is wrapped. And even with a bow. Today, we're going to talk about two of the most important poems ever written about Christmas Eve. Why? Because copies of these poems came into the Rare Book Room this past week in ways that I find particularly interesting. And we're going to start with Robert Browning's seminal poem, Christmas Eve. Now let's back up and talk about Robert Browning. Robert Browning was a poet of some note in the 19th century, who began a courtship with an even more famous poet named Elizabeth Barrett. They fell deeply in love, and they had one thing in common, Amanda. They were both descended from families that had made their fortune in the West Indies, in the slave trade, in sugar plantations. They both felt haunted and guilty about this, and it led them to embrace liberal reformist causes. So Elizabeth was a strong proponent of female suffrage and anti-slavery, and so was Robert Browning. They hit it off immediately, but Elizabeth's father disapproved. And despite the courtship, she was disinherited when she married Robert Browning, and they were forced to leave the country and go to Italy, where they lived quite happily and started a family. Their courtship inspired some of the most famous love poetry of all time. And I thought I could just read you a little bit of the most famous poem which Elizabeth wrote to Robert right before Robert published this poem on Christmas Eve. It's from her sonnets. How do I love thee? Let me count the ways. I love thee to the depth and breadth and height my soul can reach when feeling out of sight. For the ends of being and ideal grace, I love thee to the level of every day's most quiet need by sun and candlelight. I love thee freely as men strive for right. I love thee purely as they turn from praise. I love thee with the passion put to use in my old griefs and with my childhood's faith. I love thee with the love I seem to lose with my lost saints. I love thee with the breath, smiles, tears of all my life. And if God choose, I shall but love thee better after death. Sonnet 43, one of the most famous love poems of all time. Now, Elizabeth's faith, which you can see in that poem, inspired Browning to become an even stronger Christian. She believed that God's love was really poetry, and it produced a very fervent, almost evangelical faith in her. And Robert Browning wrote a poem about a skeptic who goes to church on Christmas Eve, and lo and behold, figures out the real meaning of Christmas. And I'll read you a little bit of this famous poem, just to give you a flavor. So I summed up my new resolves. Too much love there can never be. And where the intellect devolves its function on love exclusively, I, a man who possesses both, will accept the provision, nothing loath, will feast my love, then depart elsewhere, that my intellect may find its share, and ponder, O soul, that while thou departest, and see thou applaud the great heart of the artist. And that's Robert Browning on Christmas Eve. Now, one of the nice things about this particular edition, Amanda, is that it was published by Roy Crofters. Let me show you the title page here, done into print by the Roy Crofters at the Roycroft Shop, which is in East Aurora, New York. It's one of their earlier printed works. And Roy Crofters was an artist colony in New York. You can still visit it today. It was founded by a gentleman by the name of Albert Hubbard. And he was inspired by the great British artist designer William Morris and his Kelmscott Press. And all of this book, this entire book was done on handmade paper with hand-colored illustrations and handmade cloth. A beautiful example of the work of the Roy Crofters. We have a lot of their books in the Rare Book Room, in the collectible room here. Here are a couple others with the Roycroft design. All handmade and all arts and crafts. So it was really the pinnacle of the American arts and crafts movement. I'll give you another little look at some of the beautiful hand-colored illustrations that you see. Inside, this is a biography of famous scientists like Copernicus and Galileo. And then if you look in the back of the book, they all have these colophons which talk about where Roy Crofters was, what it was, and the whole done into a printed book by the Roycrofters at their shop. One of the neat things about collecting these books is there's a lot written about them. You can learn about these collectibles, and you can still find them today really for $50, $60. They're a reasonable collectible, and they're a lot of fun to discover because their influence included the worlds of architecture and design as well. Sadly, Elbert Hubbard, who founded the Roycrofters, died unceremoniously and unexpectedly on the Lusitania, the sinking of the Lusitania, and that sort of put an end to their artist colony in East Aurora. All right, that's Robert Browning and his great love affair with his wife Elizabeth. I should also note we have a lot of Elizabeth Barrett Browning's poetry here in the collectibles room. I pulled these off the shelf, some of her later poems, her love poems, the sonnets. Come check those out on a future visit. Now we're going to turn to perhaps the most famous ever Christmas Eve poem. And in this case, it came to us in the form of a newspaper. And Amanda, I am holding the Philadelphia newspaper from Christmas in 1846. And one of the interesting things about the Saturday Courier, if you look off to the side here, is that it decided to print a copy of what it was calling Annual Visit of St. Nicholas. And if you can get in there, you can really see a St. Nicholas, which is somewhat unlike the St. Nicholas of today, but inspired by the famous poem by Clement Moore. And this is one of the earlier reprintings of that poem. And did you know that this poem is steeped in controversy? It's perhaps one of the greatest literary authorship, frauds in the history of the country, because Clement Moore may not have written A Visit from St. Nicholas. In fact, he didn't even claim authorship of this poem until many years later. He was known as a biblical scholar, a sort of stern man. For instance, he didn't like smoking. Why would he have depicted a jolly old Saint Nick? He claimed later in life that he wrote it for his children. But about the time that this was being published in the newspapers, a descendant of a different gentleman by the name of Henry Livingston was reading the newspaper and saw that the poem which their father had written was being attributed to Clement Moore. And there's been an authorship battle back and forth between Henry Livingston and Clement Moore, who wrote the poem. Well, the latest scientific analysis by various professors which have used computers to examine the linguistics both in the poem and in the private writings of these two different individuals, well, they come down on the side of Henry Livingston. So everything you know about this poem, Amanda, may be wrong. By the way, do you know what Donder and Blixen mean? Any idea? Well, two of Santa's reindeer, right, of course. But they're old Dutch words inspired by Washington Irving, and they mean thunder and lightning, which is sort of interesting. Those are probably the two words that changed the most in the poem as it was reprinted over and over because people didn't quite know what those words meant. And let's just end with a tiny little bit of this on this beautiful white Christmas day. He spoke not a word, but went straight to his work and filled the stockings, then turned with a jerk, and laying his finger aside of his nose and giving a nod, up the chimney he rose. He sprang to his sleigh, to his team gave a whistle, and away they all flew like the down of a thistle. And I heard him exclaim as he drove out of sight, "Happy Christmas to all, and to all a good night." A Visit from St. Nicholas. All right, and on that note, we're going to get to our funny book. Now, it's all been very sweet. We've had love poems, we've had stories for children on Christmas Eve, but this book also came into the shop this past week, and it is perhaps one of the scariest Santa Clauses I've ever seen. That's right, Amanda, it's Murder for Christmas. Now zoom in, because this is rather remarkable. Look at Santa, influenced by the Clement Moore Santa, of course, but note that he's not only stabbed this gentleman in the back, but he slit the throat of his wife and is stealing her wedding ring. What? Santa, Murder for Christmas. This book will be available for a limited time only at the Midtown Scholar. Please check it out at our cafe counter. Watch us every Friday and every week coming forth, especially in the new year. Next week, we'll have a special New Year's Eve edition as well, a By Day Friday. Thanks for watching Adventures in the World of Books.